I'm not an economic professor. If you get $800 a week unemployment benefits, and you live with a partner who also is getting $800 a week unemployment benefits, $1,600 a week, Laura, $83,000 a year for that household in unemployment benefits. The median income in America is only $63,000. We're incentivizing people to stay home. What if we gave that additional unemployment benefits to employers to incentivize people to go to work?
Well, what if we just cut off the unemployment? I mean, hunger is a pretty powerful thing. I don't mean physical hunger, because people who truly are in need help. I'm talking about people who can work but refuse to work. But the government is literally putting anvils in many ways on people's shoulders, either through the mandates, regulations, and now through free money, which obviously we're all the piper eventually has to be paid. John, I want to ask you, though, about this idea of work-life balance, because look, no one wants to miss their kids growing up. No one wants to. You stay in the office your whole life. You never see your family. So that's really important. However, have we taken that a step too far when you think of, well, a lot of the millennials talking about, well, I need time for self-care. I don't know why I'm harping on that tonight, but the whole self-care movement is a little, I mean, my mother is not with us anymore, but she worked by the time she was 12 during the Depression. If she heard the self-care thing, I think her head would explode.
I think that's right. I have a friend in the military who trains military dogs, Laura, and they only feed a military dog at night because a hungry dog is an obedient dog. Well, if we're not causing people to be hungry to work, then we're providing them with all the meals they need sitting at home. I'm completely with you, Laura. These benefits make absolutely no sense to us. And on top of the impact of not getting employees and not being able to run our businesses, in my industry, we have meat prices are up 10%, chicken prices are up 15%.
Oh, inflation is going to kill business. I mean, that's the next shoe to drop.
Inflation is going to kill business. You heard it here first, folks. I'm Matt Leck, Left Reckoning 60, Big Pharma's Pocketbook politician, and Applebee's Vindicates Marx. With me, as always, David Griscom. Hello, David.
Hey, man, how are you doing? That is something else. I forgot that Laura Ingraham, supposed to be the grand defender of family values, is out there harping against being able to spend any times with your kids so that you spend the rest of your life serving a capitalist in their bottom line. Jesus Christ.
It turns out all that is a thin veneer for the things that you cannot say, but that drive society, a society ruled by capitalists. So we had to put the Taffer clip in the cold open because it's really the theme for tonight. Mm-hmm. We have a few bits of basically prime leftist media sort of content that hit the propaganda mill. And I think we're going to give it to you folks. There's two things. One is this Applebee's email, and another is a union buster basically meets a well-prepared, newly unionized workforce, and great audio of that. And I think this is the sort of thing that we're not really. I don't know. Maybe we'll devote the latter 45 minutes to what happened at the Oscars, but this this is the sort of bread and butter that I feel like. Look, we have this new possibilities with the internet and communications technology that likes to get sold to us as going to be revolutionary. Let's try to actually put some of the revolutionary fuel in there, which is it starts with a tweet here. And I saw this. Well, it starts with an email, actually. Mm-hmm. But this tweet here, put out by Rob Gill, Wayne Pancratz. Very Dickensian name. Sorry, Wayne. But you've really earned this one. Wayne Pancratz of Applebee's says that higher gas prices are great for business because most employees live check to check, and hopefully they can start lowering wages now. Let's just look at a little bit of this email. Or how should we get into this? Should we go through the email first and show how it was received, or?
Well, I mean, like we could talk about how it's received. We're going to read a bit from the email in just a second.
Yeah.
But as Matt was probably going to note, the thing that's really notable about this email is that the rest of the thread from everyone else who received it, it wasn't condemnation. It was celebration of the brilliant logic coming from Wayne.
Yeah, that's what I want to say is, so there's the a Great Vice News write-up. An atrocious email caused a mass resignation at Applebee's. But if we just look at, and which is true, like, and it did cause a mass resignation, and it is atrocious stuff. But that glosses over the fact that when you look at how it actually was received by some of the people on the email chain, I mean, the first thing you'll see is "Great message, sir," which,
Jesus Christ.
I mean, goodness gracious. And then at the very top, words of wisdom from Wayne. And my eyes are deceiving me. That's either 3 or 4 exclamation points. And so, and I'll just read the bottom part of that before we get into it a little bit more. But it starts off the email from Wayne, who's since been fired for saying what he shouldn't have said in writing, something that should have been left for the afterwork cocktails. Team, everyone has heard that gas prices continue to rise. The advantage this has for us is that it will increase application flow and has the potential to lower our average wage. How, you ask? Now, as a leftist, David, your ears must be burning at that sort of phrase.
No, I mean it's pretty tremendous. I mean, if we can pull up those slides here from the email, we're going to talk a little bit about what happened here, and then show how this really vindicates a lot of the writings of that kind of curmudgeonly old communist Karl Marx. But before we get there, I just want to note a couple things, just because the spin machine is running really quickly. This is not just like one local manager of like a small town Applebee's. This is somebody who's an executive in a company that manages in the neighborhood of around 30 to 40 Applebee's. So this is not some kind of small potato guy. This is somebody who is very, very deeply enmeshed in kind of capitalist thinking and thinking about people's as a kind of means to profit from, instead of the human beings that they are. And rightfully, like most people in the public have been completely outraged. But I think getting into the actual logic that he lays out here is pretty interesting. So this is the first bit from the email here. Most of our employee base and potential employee base, this is a very important phrase, we'll get there later, lives paycheck to paycheck. Any increase in gas prices cuts into their disposable income. As inflation continues to climb and gas prices continue to go up, that means more hours. Employees will need to work to maintain their current level of living. If we can just keep these going. He's got a, this is somebody who very much is reacting, to potentially higher immiseration of working people. And you should, one, condemn it, but we have to understand what's going on here. We all competed to hire out the limited applicant pool, and there was a wage war, he wrote. We all saw businesses hiring team members at $18 to $20 an hour. They will no longer be able to afford to do this. And again, we'll get back to these threads later in the show, in this segment, but this is really important too, how like these big firms are able to sort of use their power and undermine these these smaller mom and pop businesses. And this is an excerpt from the last bit, his "What is to be done" section. What can you do besides hiring employees in at a lower wage to decrease our labor when able? Make sure you have a pulse on the morale of your employees. Many will need to work more hours or get a second job. It's extremely cynical to hit at that, basically saying that I think people's lives are going to get worse, so we're going to cut their wages and expect them to work longer hours. But two, that kind of, new age American, false sweetness that you get from the boss class these days, where, I'm going to screw these people over, but you know what? I'm going to be very, very sympathetic to their everyday struggle. I
mean, yeah, that goes back a long way of like condescending to actually think about caring when people are really just something you want to take from.
No, for sure.
Half of your workforce is an easier exploited one.
And luckily, and it's a very good story in the sense that the people who he was directly talking about revolted to this, as is laid out in this Vice piece. There were mass resignations at a lot of the locations that this guy, is supervising, One of the people, Holcomb, who's 23 years old, noted that he gave everyone in the restaurant their food for free. We didn't even close the store. And then Holcomb, along with other people, left and quit their job at Applebee's. He also, rightfully so, printed out this email and distributed it to other employees and to patrons of the Applebee's location that he was at. Um, 4 out of 6 of 4 out of 6 managers and at least 10 other workers quit on the spot or handed in their notices after this happened. And now this is the important bit, because Applebee's, the corporation, which is set up like a lot of these kind of, big chains are set up, as a franchising model. They have distanced themselves from these comments saying, that these do not represent the value of Applebee's. But I think it's really notable and important to remember that rather than Wayne's comments being a kind of deviation, he just said the quiet part out loud, that their profit margin relies on the immiseration of working people.
Yeah, I mean, this is like what all the emphasis of opportunity overshadows, which is the coercion of all of this. The coercion that you cannot sustain yourself unless you are serving a capitalist in one way or the other. And in all of the time that capitalists have had full reign of, say, like, or for like rule, let's put over like workers, like let's say since like the Civil War, for instance, when they took over part of the mantle from plantation owners, they have not developed anything that allows them to make this work that isn't brutality. So like when you go to a restaurant like Applebee's, which I enjoy, like that sort of food, I'll be honest, I like that level Chili's, anything that level, Ruby Tuesdays, whatever. The problem is you realize that part of that, like subsidizing that like meal that you're having a pretty decent okay price on is the basically like despair of the workforce and the potential workforce, and that doesn't taste so good.
No, I mean, for every $1 Long Island iced tea that you can get there, those are wages being directly pulled out of the pockets of working people. I wanted to take the moment, because obviously this is despicable, and there's been pretty significant public outrage. I mean, you can go on your local news channels at this point and they're talking about this episode. But I wanted to take a moment to really break down how this reveals some of the fundamental tensions within capitalism, and why you have to go beyond just saying that like you want a nicer version of this system, but that you actually want to move into a system that works for working people instead of just for the profit margins of these big corporations. And I want to look toward Marx, because Marx wrote about this a very, very long time ago. This concept, that TAFR, that this guy Applebee's, that your boss, that all these people who profit off of other people's labor understand very, very well. And that concept is the reserve army of labor, which is a very critical part of the capitalist system. One of the arguments that you get from people who support this current system is that the share of income that goes to workers will stay stable. In other words, when the economy does well, we all do well. You don't need to have spent too much time, pouring through the data to understand that that's not the case. And why is that? There are the direct tensions between you and your boss on the shop floor, but there's an entire social level that plays into this dynamic. In fact, not only does capitalism not divvy out the profits fairly, it creates the conditions of immiseration. This is one of the key points that Marx makes. It happens especially very, very early on as capitalism is spreading throughout a society or a country, where you take people who once were able to get water or cut down trees to fuel their homes. The introduction of private property makes things that people could physically do, makes the natural resources that are around them inaccessible to them. It actually creates immiseration, and it's not just an accident. It is actually a key part of this engine. And it's also important to note too. Yeah, no, it is the business model, right? As you can see here, I mean, he's laying out very clearly. And I also just want to note too that while like that email is absolutely morally odious, while what John TAFR is saying is morally odious, and we should condemn them for that as people, but you have to remember that like the reason they think that way is because this is a key part of the system that they profit from and engage in, right? I don't think that you should spare your anger to these people on a personal level. But I also think it's really important that, you don't delude yourself into thinking that like, oh, if only we had the nice boss instead of the mean guy, if we had if we had Sam instead of Wayne, right, it would be better. That's not the case. This incident really was that this guy was just stupid enough to put it all out in an email that somehow got leaked. So for capitalism to function, it needs to create an immiserated class that will compete with those on the job floor, right? I've told this story before. I know Matt's probably experienced this. Pretty much anyone who's worked in most retail, low-wage retail, low-wage service industry jobs, you've had the same conversation before. I remember complaining once to a boss at a restaurant I worked at, and they walked me into their office and they showed me a big stack of resumes and told me quite bluntly that if I have a problem, they have plenty of other people that they can bring in who will have no problem working this job. And that is a fundamental reality of capitalism, is that this constant threat of losing your position and this fear that there is, 10 people ready to fill in for you, this kind of created disposability of labor is key in labor discipline on the shop floor, as is this system, because it creates scarcity of opportunity to work for people, right? Capitalists, you think they would want everybody to be working all the time, right? That's not the case. The thing that capitalists fear more than anything in this country is what's called full employment or approaching full employment, where people are able to leave a job and get another job down the road, the next day. And they have worked tirelessly in this country to create a dynamic where that is not the case, because they like to have people who are scared of losing access to income, right? Marx calls this the reserve army of labor, right? And a couple things before we get into, we'll go to capital action and break some of this down in more depth. But like, it's really important to understand that in the current context too, that the reserve army of labor necessitates these social programs that Taffer was complaining about in the cold open, right? When John Taffer says all these people are getting unemployment at home, they don't want to work. Well, that is an outgrowth of the needs of the capitalist class. Like, of the needs of the capitalist class to make sure that there is some level of bare necessity that's meant, so people don't just starve when they're unemployed. You need to maintain them living, and you do that by making sure that they're living the worst quality of life as possible, which is why Taffer and all these conservatives and pro-business politicians fight tooth and nail against the welfare system. But it is something that is actually necessary for the system to reproduce itself, so that when people fall out of the labor force, they don't die, but they are immiserated enough that they will take pretty much any opportunity that is given to them. Entire industries, especially service, rely on that kind of immiseration. And it's also important to note too that the level of people who are in this reserve army, it changes over time. And when that army is smaller, that is typically times when you see things like increased wages, when you see people getting concessions from their bosses, which is why we're seeing this extreme backlash from the capitalist class today, right? And a lot of that happened because to get through to make sure that capitalism didn't crumble during the coronavirus pandemic, the American state got very involved and gave people unemployment and gave people stimulus checks. It was not anywhere near enough, but it was enough that especially people on those, on working those kind of low wage jobs were more and more confident to start to demand more from their bosses, which is why, as we saw in the email, they were complaining about how they had to increase their wages during that period of time, right? So yeah, stimulus helped a lot of people leave their jobs or demand better pay at their jobs. But with that now drawing up, this capitalist class is really celebrating the return of their ability to be absolute tyrants.
Yeah, and that's why when you hear these articles like the average American doesn't have $400 in case of an emergency. That is the capitalist class and congratulating themselves on a job well done. And the reason that they donate so much to politicians and have them gum up things like further COVID assistance, say let's slice off that $600 from the $2,000 or not, extend healthcare in the pandemic. Is because of that reason. They want to maintain that sort of cudgel of deprivation that forces you to fucking go serve French fries.
Let's put up this first quote, if you could. from capital, because I just want to make this explicit, right? What this guy Wayne is saying, and much less eloquently, is literally what Marx writes about in Capital, Volume 1. So this first quote right here just lays it out quite clearly. It is the absolute interest of every capitalist to press a given quantity of labor out of a smaller rather than a greater number of laborers, if the cost is about the same. The latter had bred it at its own cost. And what he's saying there is exactly what Wayne is saying in that email. When Wayne notes that they were having to pay people $18 to $20 an hour, but now because stimulus is drying up, because there's inflation, and because most importantly gas has gone through the roof, prices have gone through the roof. They now feel more and more confident in their ability to actually lower people's wages while also, because people are getting paid less, have them work more hours, right? He says this explicitly. We're going to pay people less and have them work more. Well, so at the end of the day, what is that relationship on a financial level for the capitalists? They're coming out on top, right? They're getting more labor out of somebody for less money. And that is them recognizing the situation with the reserve army of labor sort of growing, because more and more people are being sort of cast off into these kind of desperate situations, that they can now use that to their advantage. And now we have this longer quote, and it's a bit dense, but we'll break it down, trust us, because this really explains the internal dynamic of capitalism and why you can't just expect nice people to develop out the system, and why you have to push past it. This is again from Capital Volume 1. The overwork of the employed part of the working class swells the ranks of the reserve, whilst conversely, the greater pressure that the latter, by its competition, exerts on the former, forces them to submit to overwork and to subjugation under the dictates of capital. The condemnation of one part of the working class to enforced idleness by the overwork of the other, and the converse, becomes a means of enriching the individual capitalist, and accelerates at the same time the production of the industrial reserve on a scale corresponding with the advance of social accumulation. So what does that mean here? The first bit, what Marx is saying, is that when you have a small group of people who are working and their hours are increased by their capitalist, by their boss, their hours are increasing, which means that there's less work time available for other people, right? And that creates a situation which sort of is a puzzle, right? If you think about it, like, just purely logically, why is it that some people are being forced to work 50, 60 hours a week while other people are struggling to even find a position themselves, right? And it doesn't make a lot of sense unless you understand that for the capitalist, it really works out in their favor, because they're paying somebody less to work more. They're replacing their kind of wage, their wage level that they have to pay for the profits that are produced by the working people, while also creating a very hungry and immiserated class of people who are willing at the first moment to fill in or step in for anybody who sort of gets pushed out of employment. The last bit of that quote, the condemnation of one part of the working class to enforced idleness, and this is where Marx is so great, because he's explicit, right? This isn't a natural law. This is enforced. This is a human choice to enforce idleness on people. This is another example of how capitalism is not really a system that really allocates labor and human potential well, because it creates idleness. It's not that people are lazy. It's that this system actually creates conditions that make idleness of a vast majority of people in this country, a large amount of people in this country, necessary to underlie the profits of capitalists, right? And this is not just limited to labor directly, right? This is also when you think about organizations like OPEC, the oil industry, right? We don't have a problem when it comes to oil right now of there not being enough on the planet to go into your vehicle, right? Drop the climate change stuff for a second. Just understand this is the dynamic and the contradiction of capital. You have a condition where the people who own those things want to make a resource that is not really scarce so that they can charge more money for it, right? That is them trying to push back against a term that Marx uses called overproduction, right? When you produce so much of a thing that the price falls dramatically on it, right? And so much of capitalism is not about creating abundance. right? It's actually about limiting our productive capacity so that they can sit on their fiefdoms. And they do the exact kind of same thing when it comes to labor, right? This is enforced scarcity of hours. This is enforced low wages for people, and the idleness that you see when people are unable to find work is enforced for the bottom line of capitalism. So it's just like whenever you hear a conservative, or what's the refrain now, like nobody wants to work anymore, you remind them that that is not a personal moral failing of people, but a systemic problem that is created to benefit the few at the very, very top of the system.
Yeah, if their compensation corresponded to like how much work they actually do, maybe we should show some of these people sending around emails about how higher gas prices might actually be good for the application flow. Maybe they should go like clean some restaurants and get off their ass and go do some work in those restaurants to help short staffed places. But no, of course they've graduated above that level, and now they just get to idly talk about how people going hungry is going to be going to get in like 10 more applications that week.
And I mean, I just wanted to note, sort of in closing, that it's really great that people stood up as they should. And like one of the things that I'm not to get sappy, but like I'm always really moved by people who have the bravery to like stand up against this broken system, even at personal risk, right? So it's great that people stood up and they refused to be treated in this manner. But we have to remember systematically that like until we break this system, those folks who left, they're just moving into the hands of another corporation that's using the exact same logic.
Yeah.
Right. What Wayne Packrats wrote is unbelievably immoral. He's celebrating these difficult times that people are facing, but it's not just a personal moral failing, along with like a really fucking stupid thing to write out. He's operating in the system that rewards that kind of cruel logic. And the job of socialists is not just to condemn the effects of capitalism, but to argue for a system that does not rely on this kind of exploitation of workers and the miseration of entire classes of people to create a reserve army of labor to be used to pit against us. I mean, that's the cruel thing of the reserve army of labor, is that it's trying to pit the working class. We are natural allies with one another against each other, right? And that's the real trick of this all. But socialists, we need to be arguing for a social order that works to the benefits of working people, instead of the fucking bottom line of asshole capitalists like Wayne Packrats and the rest of the, the people who kept their jobs and are still management, and the Applebee's corporation that are all just trying to wipe their hands clean of this thing, saying that like,
great wisdom,
really
sir.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is, like, I want more leaks like this, and God bless any manager who would get BCC'd on something like that. Like, oh man, that's a great way. I mean, just save it, even if you're not ready to do it now. But if you're privy to information like that, that's a historical document that we need to be saving, I think. And we have another one of those if we're ready to move on to this.
Yeah.
So some Google Fiber employees, actually, is for a contractor named BDS, no relation to the boycott, divest, sanction, voted to unionize in Kansas City, 9-1 vote to join the Alphabet Workers Union, which is part of the Communication Workers of America. And they also got, Google's participating in some union busting, it turns out, if you can believe it.
Surprising.
And so they followed a certain script that the union was prepared for, and this great little compilation of put together by the union and put out on Twitter, I wanted to share with folks here. There's a few things they're really prepared for. One, the third party of the union saying, like, you want other people to come, another outside agency to come in here, and also the implication that that their jobs will go away if they continue down this road, which shouldn't be allowed. And here, we can just enjoy this together.
Like I said, the purpose of my visit out here is purely informational. When we get to the vote, whichever way you vote, like, we're still working together regardless of how it goes afterwards.
Yeah, that's already been decided.
Yeah, we've already all decided that we want a union. We wouldn't have signed cards if we weren't informed.
So what folks sometimes will tell you that there's three parties involved. there's the employees. That's one party. One party is the company, management, right? And the other party is the union, which you can choose to have represent you or not.
We are the union.
Yeah, we are the union. I mean, we don't need the election. You guys could just recognize the union.
You're absolutely correct. So in the world of what we'll call third-party vendors, your company can decide it's no longer a value proposition for them to work in there, right? And they could say, we're not going to do Google Fiber anymore, as an example.
So are you
willing to put that in writing?
Yeah. Are you saying that if we unionize, we're going to close?
No, not at all.
It sounds like you're insinuating.
Yeah.
Like that.
No. See, I don't know how you heard that. Right?
Well,
I heard it.
And then they go to our
Yeah,
If you unionize, like, it's perfectly within the right of the client, not BDS, to say, well, we're going to go look for another vendor.
Right. But it is illegal to threaten.
I'm not
action.
threatening anybody. That wasn't a threat. If you perceive that as a threat,
I'm just making sure you're aware.
no, and I understand that.
So what we're asking for here is why we as a collective group decided to go through this process is so that those decisions aren't being made above our heads.
This negotiation will happen whether we're talking to Google or whether you guys are talking to Google.
The bottom line, we would like these negotiations to have more of our input here from the bottom line. If we have to employ representation, we will. I mean, that's why we're all sitting here wearing red meat. We love the product. We love our jobs.
Helping people.
We like helping people, that sort of thing. We're excited for our election. We're excited to be formally recognized, and we appreciate you guys' time.
I mean, I just love how sort of ready they are to jump down the guy's throat. Like, I mean, not that they voted 9-1, so it's not like there was people who needed to like see the power of it, but like what a message that sends, that like they're ready for basically each card he's going to play, and like, oh no, I wasn't implying that when I mentioned that hypothetical about a business decision. Yeah.
I mean, I also loved the first bit too, where they said we are the union.
Yeah.
When they were trying to make it seem like the union is an outside party, which is like the first thing that these guys go to, is make it seem like the union is some kind of far off outside actor. So I mean, I will just say, like, if God could bless us with as many incompetent union busters like that,
yes,
we'd be better off.
That's what I was thinking. Like, I feel like they're just like, they've been out of practice, maybe because we're at low levels of unionization historically, that like these guys are just like, they're dusting off scripts from like the 60s. And that like sort of like nuclear fallout from atomic testing back then still on them. And they're like, oh, I guess I can say this, sure. And like just hired him from Central Casting and going like, bro, what people will say is this. It's always interesting like that when they throw in phrases like at the end of the day or things like that. Like, it's like, because you realize that if you watch like reality TV, the way people try to fill up time when they are saying nothing or trying to get around like what they're actually without explicitly saying what their intentions are. Very interesting. So yeah, I hope that union busters do not get any more skilled than that. Yeah.
For sure. And, we'll be watching very closely. They're counting votes in Bessemer, Alabama right now at the Amazon facility. We'll be watching that closely. And also, we've seen more victories for the Starbucks Workers United since our show last week. So things are moving in the right direction. And, even having all of these stories to be able to cover, I think just shows that, there's momentum in a movement that very, very much, benefits from that, and it benefits all of us. So hell yeah, man. I mean, it's exciting to see and be able to talk about these things instead of as a kind of abstract principle.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we have a fun, we'll just plug the Sunday show, folks. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning. My buddy Chris Leal ran for a state house seat in Dallas as a sort of labor Democrat, sort of trying to bring back the old progressive tradition there. And we'll talk to him about how that went, and also his perspective. He's a teacher down in Dallas now, about how these sorts of these issues, the LGBT stuff, but also earlier the anti-CRT stuff, they work both as sort of like an identity race or anti-gay baiting sort of base red meat, but also as an attack on public schools and a way to try to attack public teachers. So we'll talk about that stuff with Chris. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get access to those Sunday shows.
And also, y'all, we're about 100 away from a 20K here on the YouTube channel. So if you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button.
Oh, yeah.
It'd be wonderful if we could hit that 20,000 mark by the end of the week.
Yeah, you want to be in that first 20K, folks.
That's the elite. That's the
elite.
that's the elite tier for sure. And then also, don't forget to join us in the post game. You can get access to patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Matt and I are taking voicemails. You'll get access to that phone number once you sign up. Matt and I are going to be taking a pretty interesting look at these two, nutrition podcaster bro kind of guys.
Yeah, I mean, paleo bros
who are bringing back something else extinct, or maybe not as extinct as we would like, but 19th century racist anthropology. So we'll be taking a little walk through their recent trip to Africa. You won't want to miss that.
Honestly, it's instead of the Teddy Roosevelt style safari outfit, whereas it's now just like Patagonia and sort of sandals, but it's the same thing. All right, folks, we're going to get to our interview with Andrew Perez, and we'll see you on the other side of this. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as always, David Griscom.
How's it going, Matt?
It's going well. And joining us this evening, we are happy to be joined by Andrew Perez. He's a senior editor and reporter at The Lever, covering money and influence. I North Dakota me wants to say The Lever, but welcome, Andrew.
Thank you.
And tell us, what is The Lever? And what happened to the Daily Poster that we've all came to know and love? Because I just want to say, actually, before I let Andrew go, is if you watch a lot of this stuff on YouTube, none of this ecosystem could exist without the type of work that they do at the Daily Poster turned The Lever. Is this sort of like the actual intelligence that people are using to opine on stuff. So this stuff is extremely valuable, and if you can, you should support it at levernews.com. So Andrew, what is The Lever?
Thank you. So The Lever is a reader-funded investigative news site, and we cover money and influence and money and influence on policy. So like on healthcare, climate, and we're trying to produce all original reporting for readers.
And this is the stuff I think that really, if you're kicking out for a bunch of different opinion shows, I think you should go to the actual source a little bit too. So I just would plug that. So let's dive in here, Andrew. You have a number of stories we're going to talk about. Let's start with this one here. Pharma Group to Cinema. We've got your back. This is from February. And I think what I like about the Daily Poster, and certain people might be relieved to hear, is they go at both Democrats and Republicans, of course, and particularly Cinema and Manchin. So there's an ad here that I think we all need to watch, and it may give us something, make us feel a little bit something that we might not have felt about Kyrsten Sinema before.
Arizonans are tough and independent, just like Kyrsten Sinema. Every day, she fights to improve the lives of working families while protecting our pocketbooks. Like leading on the bipartisan infrastructure bill that controls costs, rebuilds our roads, and grows the Arizona economy with good jobs. Working tirelessly until the job is done right, just like we do here in Arizona. Thank Kyrsten Sinema and tell her keep fighting. We have your back, just like you've always had ours.
Now, so I just to point out one thing about that is fighting for the bipartisan infrastructure bill, but also blocking the real infrastructure bill that we actually needed, and Joe Biden ran on the Build Back Better. So that's just one thing to know. But who is center forward And why are they running this ad?
So Center Forward is effectively like what used to be called like the Blue Dog Coalition, but it's no longer just like a Democratic organization. It's bipartisan or nonpartisan. Anyway, they ostensibly support centrist politicians, but if you do even just kind of like cursory research into them, you find that like they are funded by Pharma, like Big Pharma, the main kind of lobbying group for them for the drug industry in DC. And they're accounting for at least like a quarter of Center Forward's revenue over the last few years. And then their board is also made up of a whole bunch of corporate lobbyists, including at least a handful who are working for Pharma and also a series of other drug companies. And yeah, I mean, the context, here is, as you were mentioning, Sinema helped stall the kind of Biden agenda bill, the Build Back Better bill, which includes like measures to reduce prescription drug prices by allowing Medicare to actually negotiate them, right? Like the government 20 something years ago banned Medicare from negotiating drug prices. This bill would allow Medicare to start doing that. And Sinema, for most of like last year, like over the summer, was sort of leading the charge to defang that measure to reduce its punch, like, and specifically kind of how much it would take away from Pharma, like how many drugs you can negotiate. So it's been watered down considerably, but even if it were to pass, it's still would represent the first time that Medicare would be allowed to negotiate drug prices.
I mean, it's truly cynical to say that, Sinema's out there looking out for your pocketbooks when many people in Arizona very much are struggling to meet the ridiculous obligation to pay off their pharmaceutical bills at the end of the month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it is definitely pretty absurd. And like the we have your back line is like, it felt for me like I was just like, no way, I can't believe they're saying this, right? Like, I guess they're sort of framing it as if they're a sort of group of people who are in Arizona, but that is not the case. Center Forward is basically a corporate front group that is registered in a Northern Virginia lobbyists McMansion and like McLean. It's ridiculous. Like that's its official address when you look up their like ad buys. Like it's just really, really obscene.
And that sort of phraseology is interesting in an ad like that, because there's also the look after your pocketbook, like David said, which directly after you mentioned that you love working people or whatever, that hits one way, but also it reads another way to like giant corporate donors probably and folks like that. I'm curious, like Sinema, these centrist or corporatists, like I gotta imagine like this sort of makeup of the Senate's been really good for them.
Yeah. Center Forward has run some ads. Well, what's funny is she's the kind of only person we've seen them running ads supporting. They had a very light pressure campaign on Joe Manchin, but yeah, they've been supporting Sinema for like several months now. They've run a whole bunch of ad campaigns. They've sent direct mail pieces. And then they've done some lighter advocacy for a few of the kind of pharma Dems in the House who kind of worked with Sinema to gut that measure. But Sinema's been their sort of pride and joy, like from an advertising standpoint.
Could you talk a little bit about, because Sinema's interesting, obviously, because of her role in the Senate, sort of like slowing down and frankly, gutting legislation that's geared to help out, regular working class Americans. So it's very clear that she's raking in some money. But how is that sort of affecting her on the ground? And is there is the money sort of looking like it's going to be enough to protect her in the long run?
Yeah. I guess I haven't seen polling so recently, but there's definitely been polls showing her struggling among Democrats. Like her approval is pretty underwater right now. And if you look into the polls, she's also struggling with independents.
Interesting.
Like, I think some people think of like independents as like these, just people who make up their mind all the time. But, that's, or who don't have any kind of ideology, but that's not really the case, right? It's like independents are generally like left leaning or right leaning for the most part. And she's doing very badly with independents. But, the other thing is, there's not a hell of a lot of constituency for like higher drug prices. Like this is one of the issues that is truly bipartisan. Like in that no one wants to pay higher drug prices. There is huge majority support for allowing Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices. And obviously at a policy level, like many other countries do this. Pretty much every other country allows or already does that, right? Like we have carved out a special predatory just base for the pharmaceutical industry here. Like the House Democrats put together a study a few months ago showing that pharmaceutical companies have expressly targeted the U.S. for higher drug prices, and it's because they can.
Mm-hmm. Would you mind just for somebody who might be watching this and is not really following, could you put a little bit of meat as to like why having the government being able to negotiate drug prices is so important, to keeping the cost down?
Yeah, I mean Medicare is just a huge payer. So if they would, like, by them negotiating drug prices, it would lower drug prices for everyone in this country. Your insurance company is not going to want to pay 4 times what Medicare is paying. They might pay a little more because there's that kind of agreement between private insurers and pharmaceutical companies and hospitals to all get to charge as much money as they want. But the other thing is actually this. The Medicare prescription drug measure was designed to allow private insurance to pay the same prices as Medicare. But I guess I'm not 100% sure if that part was sort of stripped out, or actually what's been an issue is there's been some question as to whether the parliamentarian, who I'm sure no one wants to hear about, the Senate parliamentarian might say that isn't quite budget related if it's like a private insurance policy, paying the same amount as Medicare, like that it might be sort of extraneous, but we never really got that far since the legislation just completely stalled. I'm not sure she ever issued her ruling on those issues.
Yeah, I think we should move. Let's switch the order a little bit and go to this Fetterman versus Connor Lamb thing. Can you just give folks an outline of who Fetterman and Lamb are in this race before we get into some of the behind-the-scenes stuff?
Sure. So Connor Lamb is, sort of centrist, corporatist, maybe moderate Democrat in the House. He's won a few elections now. I think he was elected in 2017 or 2018. He was elected in a special, but he's in a district that has swung from like Trump to Biden to Trump. So it's a swing district. And he, is sort of the moderate favorite for, at least DC moderates favorite for Senate. John Fetterman is, is considered more progressive. He backed Bernie in 2016. And he is the lieutenant governor in Pennsylvania currently. I think he defeated like a sitting lieutenant governor in the primary a couple of year ago. So, he I think had run for Senate some years ago too, and he's sort of built a statewide presence. Like I don't think people really appreciated that, but like he's done a lot of touring around the state. So that's anyway. The race is like Fetterman right now is considered to be leading, and Lamb is sort of disappointing so far.
And just for the purposes of for policy positions, Fetterman has talked nicely about single payer. What are his what's he saying about healthcare now?
Yeah, I mean, he's making like a pitch for universal healthcare, though. He's not using like the words like single payer or Medicare for all. He did, so like some years ago, he had been like a pretty strong proponent of Medicare for all, and was like, why aren't politicians talking about it, kind of thing. he's probably running slightly to the center of where he's been, but he's still considered like a single payer supporter.
And nonetheless, we got another group we have to learn about called Penn Progress. Who are they, and what's their message?
Sure. So they're a new super PAC. I guess they registered late last year, but they've been, for the last like month and a half, they've been talking about getting involved in this race. And there's really not much about them. Like their website is, honestly, I think they only put up their website last week. Like same with their Facebook and Twitter account. Like they haven't posted anything. They don't say who they are. There's very limited information, and they have not started spending in the race yet. But what they are probably known for at this point is they last week Politico reported that Penn Progress has been reaching out to potential donors, basically saying like Fetterman is crushing our guy Lamb. Like he's up like 30 points on him, and like Lamb and like voters don't really see Fetterman as the liberal he is, and like the dynamics here are not going to change unless we get involved. And they started testing some potential negative attacks too, to say that if we launch all these highly misleading and negative attacks on John Fetterman, he might not be in as good a position as he is now. And several of those attacks were like, we're going to call him a socialist because he backed Bernie in 2016. We're going to call him. We're going to say that he supports the $34 trillion government takeover of healthcare because he supports single payer. And what else? He supports defund the police is what they're going to say. And his campaign has been pretty quick to say that's not true.
It sounds very Republican.
yeah. These attacks do sound Republican, but they, the healthcare industry one really piqued my interest because it's the exact kind of crap you hear from healthcare lobbyists. Like it is from Republicans and healthcare lobbyists, because obviously, like single payer is not a government takeover of healthcare. It's government takes the place of your private insurance, which most people who are on private insurance know that it, is not great, not good. No one likes it.
Unless you work there.
Yeah, and even then, unless you're like high up, you might not like it either. They might try to rally you to lobby against this stuff, but you're not like raking in big bucks like as like an administrative clerk in any of these companies. For sure. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I was going to say that the thing that we found, and it was out there actually, like on Google. So the guy who is leading this group, Penn Progress, his name is Eric Smith. He's a former like Obama 2008 and 2012 consultant. He runs this communications firm called 7 Letter. It used to be called Blue Engine Message and Media. I don't know if people know who these people are, but anyway, 7 Letter, according to these corporate filings that we found that were pretty readily available, 7 Letter works for Cigna, and like the health insurer Cigna, and also some other kind of corporate lobbying groups, and companies like Airmark that are like food service companies, or basically a bunch of big kind of corporate interests. And obviously Cigna has some thoughts on single payer healthcare or anything in between what we have now and that, right? Like they also oppose they threatened to leave Connecticut over Connecticut trying to institute a very weak state public option, like a state public health insurance plan, which their threat kind of killed it a few years ago.
But Andrew, I mean, apparently this is progressive politics. I mean, this is from the piece y'all published in the Lever. Sorry. This is Eric Smith's response to y'all. It says, "I'm a volunteer for this effort because I'm a progressive who believes that maintaining control of the U.S. Senate is critical to the success of the Biden administration. He rejected the idea that attacking Fetterman could benefit his firm's clients, calling it untrue and inaccurate."
Yeah. Yeah, no, we found that interesting.
You can just let that sit there, you know what I mean?
Well, one note on that is that we need to let everybody know how much of a socialist the guy kicking my candidate's ass in this election is. We need to let everyone know how socialist he is because we need to beat Dr. Oz. And actually, like, in a head-to-head matchup, is that the case? Does it look like that Connor Lamb is the Dr. Oz Slayer?
It doesn't yet. According to Penn Progress's own polling that Politico obtained, John Fetterman has a significantly better lead against Dr. Oz, who is, yes, a Senate candidate, than Connor Lamb. Yes. There was a lot there to appreciate. The I'm a progressive part. I mean, I was like talking with like another like reporter I know about this. He was saying, like moderates will argue that like we need like Democrats won't hold the Senate if it's Fetterman. And it's like, yeah, they will argue that, but I don't know if I would, ever be convinced of that.
Yeah. I mean, I just wish like, maybe we're getting to the point, because you see occasionally like these like Madison Cawthorn praising Joe Manchin as a statesman, like this understanding of like moderate quote unquote Democrats are basically just like reactionaries in blue. But let's skip over to the other side of the aisle. Well, not entirely because Joe Manchin, but the Koch brothers. Let's talk about the Kochs. And I'm curious, like as a reporter on this beat, the Koch brothers, explain Charles Koch, the remaining sort of active political member, who they are, and are they sort of a moon type of a dominant dark money force, or are they like sort of the Big Dipper in a constellation of right-wing money? If that's a little bit too confusing, but like I'm curious, like some people say that Jane Mayer's book, for instance, overemphasized the role of the Koch brothers, and you hear this criticism a lot, and I kind of just think it's something to a way to have a criticism, because like any text can only focus on like a certain amount of things. But yeah. I'm curious about the Koch brothers generally, and then tell us what they're up to in West Virginia.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, like, okay, like, yes, there are some other conservative funders who are, I guess, actually spreading the money around in a significant way. But the Kochs, Charles Koch, David Koch, who died a few years ago, they really kind of, I mean, they seeded so many of the conservative groups we see right now. And like in 2010, like they financed the Tea Party movement pretty single-handedly, or maybe not single-handedly, but they had a very big effect on that. And they fund, they fund hyper-conservative like advocacy groups. They fund universities, like they fund like university programs, like like Mercatus, like the big like economics, like long economics program at George Mason University. Right. Like, yeah, they're influential, and they also run like their own kind of advocacy groups beyond just financing this sphere of conservative advocacy. Americans for Prosperity is a very big election spender, and that's theirs. They have this group called Stand Together that finances both Americans for Prosperity and a million other conservative groups. And so like, I think you'll sometimes see like pundits be like conservative pundits be like, oh, like everyone like kind of mocking the idea that like Charles Koch controls the world. I'm like, okay, maybe he doesn't control the world, but he definitely finances their groups most of the time, right? Like, so it's, yeah, I mean, there is a point to what they're saying, but it's not like entirely legit either.
Yeah. It's like, it's one thing to make that criticism and say, let's talk more about like the Scafee Foundation and like those other groups versus let's hand wave away the effective influence of like fossil fuel oligarchs and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, and so, okay, like Charles Koch, they host, his network hosts like this big conference every year for like other conservative donors where like they're all making decisions about who to give money to. Like, right. They don't fund everything. Like there are other financiers here, but like often like the Koch network like kind of helps organize it.
It coordinates it. Okay.
Yeah. And like, they lobby at the state level, the federal level. Like they have a lot of influence. And okay, so should we talk about this story then?
Yeah.
That'd be helpful.
Yeah. So, okay. So the story that we reported on them is that there's this West Virginia attorney general is trying to overturn basically the EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gases, saying that it's not in the EPA's authority under the Clean Air Act. And yeah, we just looked through, Sheldon Whitehouse, the senator from Rhode Island, has been really big on this, talking about this kind of amicus brief pipeline where conservative groups or the Kochs are financing these conservative groups that then file legal briefs in these Supreme Court cases and down the line too, where they then are making the intellectual case for overturning every regulation you can think of. And that's what we've seen here. And we'd reported this a few months back too, or maybe it was sometime last year. Charles Koch has recently, he's best known for being in the oil and gas industry, but he also has, during the pandemic, started buying up started investing in real estate, residential real estate, single family home companies, actually, in particular. And he was funding these conservative groups that were, also suing to overturn the COVID eviction ban, the federal eviction moratorium. So it's something you kind of see over and over again. You look up, you're like, who are these groups involved in these briefs, or who are filing these briefs in the Supreme Court case, and you just Google them. You're like, oh, Koch funded, and it's sometimes you might see $10,000. Okay, in this world that is not real money, right? In the conservative or in the nonprofit world, $10,000 isn't terribly meaningful. But sometimes it's $1 million a year, and it's okay, that's half the organization or more. And that's what we saw with a bunch of these groups, is that they've given millions of dollars to some of them.
And I'm sure most of our listeners, and certainly people who are reading y'all's work, are familiar with this, but it is just worth noting that a lot of times when people talk about money in politics, there's a kind of fixation on congressional donations, and obviously that matters a lot. But if, the past few years have taught us anything, it's that the right wing is very, very committed right now to using, the legal sphere to also, pursue their kind of policy goals. And that can be just as damaging as, giving a donation to a kind of right wing congressional candidate that puts them over the top. Creating a kind of legal apparatus that can undermine decisions of democratically elected governments is just as worrying, if not more worrying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the outside groups here are the real money more often than not, right? People will see it, they're okay, all these companies donated to these lawmakers who voted to overturn the election, right? That's a story, but the real story in all of that is always going to be okay, the House GOP, the House Republicans have a dark money arm and a super PAC, and those groups can accept, they're not bound by any kind of contribution limit, right? There's a $2,900 contribution limit for a political campaign for federal candidates for office, at least from individuals. But you can give $1 million to a super PAC backing that candidate. You can get a lot more bang for your buck through outside groups, or at least you can put a lot more money in. And that's we try to follow that money as much as we can, because it's just, to us, it is obvious that's where the influence is.
And this also creates a whole ecosystem and relationships too. Obviously a lot of lawmakers, people who run for office later, are people in the law profession. And, if your entire life, law school, post-law school, you're sort of inundated with these kind of conservative money groups. Again, even if it's not the same as directly funding a group or a congressional candidate or anything like that, these are the kind of people, if I spend time with them, if I associate myself with them, then I'll be, sort of rolling in it, especially, and it's really great, especially if you have very much, floating personal political positions. But that really creates an apparatus that can pull in a lot of younger people to be, the next generation of firebrands in the conservative movement too. This is not an accident. They're not just throwing money at the wall. They understand that this gets results in the long term too.
Oh yeah, I mean, Turning Point USA is probably is a great example of that. That's a group, and that's a group that's grown over the last few years. And I guess for people who don't know who they are, and maybe a lot of people who do know who they are because they're so goofy. But it's like a conservatives on campus group, and it has they organize nationally. They throw these big rager conferences. And I'm sure Rager is overselling it. I'm sure I'm overselling it because I've been to CPAC several times and it is horrible. And but everyone there is a child.
Is the food good at least? I don't know.
No. It's everyone there is a child and has never been kissed, and that's fine. It's fine. But Turning Point USA is the teen, the adult teen version of that, right? The young adult version, and they get a lot of money from. For instance, Leonard Leo runs this dark money network. He was Trump's top judicial advisor, and he is a longtime executive at the Federalist Society, which is a conservative lawyers network. If you look up the Federalist Society, every member of the Trump administration is a FedSoc member. It's not just judges; it's every conservative lawyer. Leonard Leo also runs this side dark money network that helped pack the court, right? It helped install all these conservative justices. They also give money to Turning Point USA. They give millions of dollars every year to him. And I think that he's received some Coke money too. Or by he, I mean Charlie Kirk, the guy who runs Turning Point USA. So yeah, okay.
No, that's great. I mean, I feel there's some fracking stuff behind Kirk, I know, and that sort of stuff. I want to get just lay out the stakes for this attack on the EPA's authority to regulate this stuff, because I think this is right, but correct me if I'm wrong. But this is about a case to do with Chevron and what's known as Chevron deference, basically that government bureaucracies are allowed to say hey, this is a pollutant, we can regulate that, as opposed to basically making Congress go over it. Is that basically it?
Well, so the Clean Air Act allows Congress to, allows the EPA to regulate pollutants, stuff that pollutes the air. And what these conservative groups are saying is that okay, that's too broad. We basically need a new law every time there's a new pollutant the government wants to regulate. Instead of saying we want to regulate greenhouse gases, instead of the EPA saying that, we're actually going to have to, the Congress is going to have to send them a bill saying you can regulate carbon emissions. And obviously the context here is we're all going to die, right? We under that scenario, right? We have limited time to be making big changes to in how we use energy. And that this kind of rule, it would be catastrophic, and it wouldn't only affect climate either. It would affect the whole federal agency's ability to regulate and do the job that they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, it's a real libertarian wet dream. Sort of. Yeah. Andrew, thanks. You can check in with Andrew over at the levernews.com. Give us another plug for Lever News.
Yeah, so it is a reader-funded investigative news site. We're covering money and influence, and we could definitely use your support. We rely on readers, and we're actually we've been pretty successful so far. We're growing. We're hoping to launch some new products soon. Right now, it's a newsletter you get in your inbox every day, but we're hoping to be adding new products soon and more staff.
Have you thought about doing a fake right-wing outlet to try to soak up a whole bunch of cash and then just shovel it to your actual good work that you do? Because me and David could maybe put on some MAGA hats and try to do a fake.
Yeah. Officially speaking, no, I have not.
Okay, good. All right. Andrew Perez, thank you so much for joining us. It's Andrew Perez DC at Andrew Perez DC on Twitter. Go follow him, folks.
Thank you.
All right, folks. This is good talking to Andrew. Very prolific. Pretty much everybody over at the Daily Poster is extremely prolific, but Andrew really does pump out a lot of interesting little articles over there. So.
No, I mean, I definitely appreciate somebody who's willing to sort of comb through financial filings and stuff for the rest of us. It's a great service.
Yeah, and I mean that what I say about like that sort of reporting. Capitalism is not incentivized to just do that because it's good for public service, right? If you look at charts, if you want to get doom and gloom and see something that's sort of, as horrifying as like climate reports, look at how fast reporting news jobs are going down and how high marketing jobs are going up. So you want to look at the information that capitalism is incentivized to give you. It's not what levernews.com is putting out there. So yes, it is David Sirota's organization, and we should get David on actually as well once he's back from the Oscars and all the Hollywood stuff.
That'd be wonderful. We're going to get to this story from South Dakota in a second, but I don't know, something happened when we were on break that I figured might be worth doing a plug real quick to a former show that show that we did recently made public. It was a premium show that we released. But right here, there's just a little bit of a news peg for the St. Louis Commune and the Veiled Prophet Ball, which I felt is worth re-upping for folks. So Sarah Sirota notes for The Intercept, a new and heiress of the Anheuser-Busch beer fortune was crowned queen at the notoriously racist and elitist St. Louis Veiled Prophet Ball in 1977. Now Trudy Busch is running to be Democrats' nominee for Missouri's Senate seat. It's an interesting story there that you should definitely check out at The Intercept. But I just figured it's worth plugging this again because we had a conversation with historian and former lawyer Mark Kruger, who broke down this really historic moment that a lot of folks aren't familiar with, which was during the Great Railroad Strike in 1877, communists and workers, got together and they took over the city of St. Louis, and they held it for something near like 2 weeks, doing everything, including running city services to helping the mail get there on time.
Yeah, I mean the note about the mail is so interesting to me because one, it's a great show of yes, you can do this stuff like keep mail functioning, but also they had to do it so the government couldn't come in and crush them for interfering with the mail.
Well, it's just showing how to be a practical revolutionary, basically. Make sure that
Exactly.
people know things are going to get better under workers' control. And for people who aren't familiar, basically the year after 1878, the Veiled Prophet Parade and the Veiled Prophet Ball started, which were explicitly meant as a gathering of the rich and powerful in that area to intimidate and suppress and basically break working class solidarity. And that's a tradition that continues all the way to today. So it's just a good reminder that, the history of American labor, the American labor movement is rich. The American socialist movement is been a part of this country for a very, very long time. It's not some kind of foreign importation as much as people like James Lindsay make it out to be. And lastly, a lot of these traditions and mores and the culture of rich people very, very much originates from trying to put down and break the socialist threat to their regime of exploitation here. So just always
the multicultural. I just want to say the multicultural socialist threat because you say it is domestic here, but only domestic here in the way that we are, like in the sense of came from all over the world and settled here, right? And very interesting stuff about recently freed former slaves and people speaking in different types of European languages, all at the same sort of commune. You have to have this basically like clan prom with this veiled prophets thing to sort of reimpose a type of order because and one of the things the commune sort of bargained away early on that kind of took the wind out of it, if memory serves, was the nightly parades. And it's just interesting as like a way to impose sort of like, to demonstrate the will of the people. Very interesting stuff. And like that recently, what's her name? Did you say it already? The actress that got
Ellie Kemper.
Ellie Kemper. Yeah. So I mean, this stuff is very interesting. I mean, Hobsbawm's got that book Inventing Tradition, right? And like this is a classic case in how tradition is invented, and the ones that are sort of maintained by the upper classes has a purpose.
No, I mean, no doubt about it. And I mean, obviously, this is like people who are regular watchers know we cover this a lot. But like, I've been really coming through this book, Grassroots Socialism, Radical Movements in the Southwest, 1895, 1943. Absolutely fascinating text. And, it just is truly amazing how rich of a history we have here that really has affected a lot of the big moments that you learn about in school, but all the kind of subtext and the prelude is always ignored, very much to try to make it seem like, there never was a really strong labor movement in this country because we got along so well with their bosses. And there's some flare-ups here or there, but, labor peace was the true American tradition, when nothing could be further from the truth. So it's always good to look into your local history because you'll be surprised. You'll find a lot more than you think.
Yeah, and I mean that really is like a left reckoning thing, is become a steward of your local history. Like, I mean, as far as like how do you communicate with people in your community, like that stuff is going to be interesting to them because they're in the same place you are, right? And I mean, look, if they're a capitalist, it might be interesting for a different reason, but they probably listen to what you have to say about like how labor or whatever struggle punched them back in the face. But it happens, and you should know about it.
Absolutely. Well, y'all, we have one more segment before we go to the post game, but just want to re-up. Join us over there at patreon.com/left reckoning. We appreciate everyone's support. It really helps us grow and be able to cover more of this. I mean, the hope would be that we'd be able to start being able to do some more on-site stuff in the future and being able to tell some of these stories because I think it's desperately needed. If you sign up now, patreon.com/left reckoning, it's just $5 to support the work we do here. You'll get access to our bonus episode on Sunday. And then you'll get access to the post game where you'll be able to leave us a voicemail, ask us questions about whatever you're interested in, or just tell us something about what's going on in your community. It's always really great to hear from folks. And Matt and I will also be taking a deep dive into how a couple of health bros rediscovered the pretty nasty colonialist tradition of 19th century racist anthropology.
Yeah. It's really, those guys have really rubbed me the wrong way, actually.
I mean, it's absolutely disgusting, and it's also hilarious just how like willingly they fall into all of the old tropes. From they even use the term modern humans at one point to describe themselves as in opposition to people. Anyways, we'll take a deep dive, and that'll be a lot of fun. But before we get to that, Matt, we have a really interesting and important story out of South Dakota here. Out of Rapid City, if I recall correctly. Would you like me to set it up? Yeah, we have it right here. I mean, if you want to take us through the title, I can give people the kind of background about the incident.
Yeah, so NDN Collective, who's also been organizing some of the response to this incident, has this article here. Tribal leaders of the Ochedi Shakowee, it's pronounced, deliver notice of trespass and eviction notice to Grand Gateway Hotel. Citing Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, 5 tribal leaders of the Ochedi Shakowee, the 7 council fires of, in parentheses, the 7 council fires of the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota nations, led a march on Saturday in Rapid City, delivering a notice of trespass and posting it on the door of the Grand Gateway Hotel. Now, before like Joe Rogan gets involved and says, "Oh, this is them turning against all white people. What's going on here?" Do you want to explain that part, Dave?
Yeah, because I mean, it's just a nasty story that is unfortunately not very unique. But in Rapid City, there is a hotel that has a sports bar in it, where there was an incident, serious enough. Somebody got shot.
Important point to make here, which is that because so much of what we talk about with regards to problems with society is driven by political campaigns, there's this idea created in people's minds that crime is only rising in places like Chicago and New York City and Los Angeles. Actually, it's pretty much everywhere. Omaha, right? Like a lot of pretty much everywhere, and it's because. Surprise, there's a pandemic going on, and like what have we been talking about all night? We're putting the force to people when we should be meeting their needs instead, but we need to drive them back into the workplace. So of course you're going to have a whole bunch of strife, right? Like we've basically left people to fend for themselves, except for a nice sizable check, relatively like what this country does here or there. And also look, not to endorse any sort of like Bloombergian gun control stuff. Guns don't make places safer. No. They just don't. And so this is the problems that are frankly like endemic to America that we have to deal with. And so like that's a point that needs to be made, is violence is going up everywhere.
Well, here's how not to deal with it.
Yeah.
So this hotel here, and this is from a piece in HuffPost, South Dakota tribal leaders say hotel banning Native Americans as trespassing by Andre Ellington. And let's just get to the main bit here. So there was a shooting that happens, and this bar owner goes out on Facebook and also sent a bunch of people emails as well, going back to the beginning of the episode. And it's Connie Uri. I hope I'm saying that right, but I don't care too much.
Uri, yeah, that's a very Dakota name, white person name.
But here's their Facebook post. Due to the killing that took place on the Grand Gateway Hotel on March 19th at 4 a.m., plus all the vandalism we have had since, the mayor and police department are working with the nonprofit organization Dark Money. What are they? Who are they talking about there? I will say I'm no expert as to what's going on local politics there, but I would be curious to see, if the mayor and the government in that city is particularly radical leftists. I'd be a bit surprised.
I mean, typically they probably have like a genuine like sort of public sensitivity to Native folks. Like this is Mayor Steve Allender, pointing this out right now. I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen what the suggestion of the nonprofit organization.
Nobody knows from everything I've read.
Is.
Yeah, exactly. Which is about fair game for unhinged Facebook rants.
I know that's the interesting thing is like and the only other place I've heard that is in all the stuff for Ketanji Brown Jackson and the confirmation hearings is they've said like she's got dark money. So I don't know if she's just decided to use that attack but whatever, right? Like ridiculous because you know what she can't say? Because she can't say the mayor defunded the police, because all these places where violence is going up, that hadn't happened any place.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
here's the bit.
Here's the bit.
Yeah, I mean, here's the bit. That rightfully has gotten them into hot water. We will no longer allow any Native American on property or in Cheer Sports Bar. Natives killing natives. Ranchers and travelers will receive a very special rate of $59 a night, book direct. And the mayor called them out, and as have many other people in the community for it. I mean, and that's just like a rich cultural historical comment. Frankly, one, just explicit racism against Native people, and two, trying to like incentivize the image that they're trying to play into, if like a white rancher is more than welcome to come and stay there and even save a little bit of money doing so, while they will, argue that they're going to bar Native Americans from the property. And we have this video here, and we could talk a little bit about the response, but it just should be noted that one, there is an active lawsuit against the hotel. And while the son of this hotel owner has said nobody has actually been denied, she got upset and made a mistake, that is not the case. That is not what we're hearing from people on the ground. I believe the Indian Collective also has gotten audio of Native people basically being told that they're not allowed to book at the hotel. But the response here has been pretty swift and impressive, I must say. So that is, people there serving an eviction notice to the hotel, because they argue the hotel is now in violation of treaties with the Great Sioux Nation for denying Native people access to the hotel.
I mean, I think that's I I consider that justice, and yeah, sounds great to me.
The treaty. This is from the HuffPost piece. The treaty with the Sioux, April 29th, 1868. The treaty states that no white person or persons shall be permitted to settle upon or occupy any portion of the land north of the North Platte River or east of the summits of the Bighorn Mountains, or without the consent of the Indians first had and obtained to pass through the same. The Great Sioux Nation is instructing the Grand Gateway Hotel to evacuate immediately.
Yeah, like all these treaties, like basically a way to like figure out how to get the sort of infrastructure of settlement protected in ways that were, like negotiated advantageously for the U.S. In its own right, and then also not honored by the U.S. despite that those advantageous negotiating position sort of postures. So I think that's great. I think there should be more honoring of those sorts of and invoking, as I mean, Native folks do. I don't need to tell them to invoke treaties anymore, but a great understanding of what it actually means and actually how it's not just some relic of history and people aren't on some sort of like Nick Cage-esque journey into historical documents. Like this stuff should matter. It should be made to matter, and it can be made to matter in our court system if there's a will, of people's will that is behind it. So yeah, that's great.
Absolutely, we need much more of it.
Yeah.
Well, y'all, this has been a very jam-packed opening show, but we got a hell of a lot more in the post game. Join us at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We'll see you, I think, promptly this time at 9 Central for the post game. So leave us some voicemails in the meantime, and we'll see you all in about half an hour.
Yeah, check out the voicemails. Look at that. 1-940-289-7234. 940-289-7234.
All right. See y'all soon.
See you, folks.